I love that, because a lot of your critics, we'll get to some of them later, they describe your message as somewhat dark and
it isn't somewhat dark, it's very dark.
Right, okay, you acknowledge that, but actually what you've just described there is hope. It's hopeful. It's like, okay, the world may be chaotic, but I can do something about my little bit of it. It reminds me of something very famous that, in fact, probably the most famous thing that Margaret Thatcher said, and a lot of people misinterpreted it. She perhaps could have not allowed herself to be taken out of context, but she was asked back in the 80s when she was Prime Minister in the UK and there's a big crime problem, well, isn't crime the fault of society? And she just responded instinctively with this very famous phrase, there's no such thing as society. There are just individual men and women and their families, and they are the ones who should take responsibility. She meant that society was formed, that the building blocks are individual.
Well, I
shouldn't have got... I would love to go on all day about that, but I'm afraid we're going to take a break right now.
It's the most valuable thing. It's the most powerful thing. And yet, with our postmodern mindset, there is no such thing as absolute truth anymore. This is so ironic, so ironic. Please hear me carefully. In all that we are seeing with the moral confusion of our time and the so-called Me Too movement and all of that, what you see happening is the quintessential expression of the contradiction with which we live. All of our university students are taught, primarily at least they're taught, that truth is not absolute. Morality is not absolute. They are trained to be relativistic in their thinking. They are trained to be relativists. And so when they go out in their professions and live relativistic lifestyles, all of a sudden they are smacked with an absolute. You don't do these things. Why not? Why not? If relativism holds sway, what am I told? It's ultimately relative to myself. Or if you wish, when the absolutes were gone, we had to park it somewhere, and of all places, we parked it in the institution that we trust the least. We call it being politically correct. The one institution that we doubt. And that's where we've parked our absolutes at the same time. You see, every one of us has absolutes. The only difference is whether we abide by them or only use them by which to judge somebody else. The absolute is inescapable in your heart. The question is, do you live by it or do you only use it to judge other lives?
See, so often in the last few decades, psychologists and other people who are well-meaning have told everyone, you're okay the way you are. You should feel good about yourself. It's like, I think that's a terrible message for young people, especially young people. It's not a great message for anybody, but it's especially bad for young people because many young people are suffering from, say, a crisis of meaning and purpose. And if you tell them, well, you're okay the way you are, it's like there's no direction for them. What you tell young people is, look, you know, you're young and you're making mistakes and you don't know what you're doing exactly, but there's something to you, man. If you could tap into the potential that lies within you, let's say, if you could take on a noble attitude towards the world and work to rectify suffering and to constrain malevolence, God only knows what you could become.
So here we are, 2018. We do not know how to define anything. We cannot define who we are in gender. We cannot define who we are in marriage. We cannot define who we are in our proclivities. We cannot define anything of any worth or of any absolute. We toss it up into the wind, as it were, and decide which way we are wanting to go. This is a dangerous time in which to be alive, because there are no definitions. When you don't have any definitions, how are we going to deal with reality?
There's a lot of suffering in life, and it's often contaminated by malevolence, because we can take a bad situation for us and our families and our communities and certainly do everything we can to make it worse. And so there's a dark element to life, and in order to be able to sustain yourself through that properly, you have to find something that's deeply meaningful. And you have an instinct for meaning. I mean, I think you can make a strong case for that neurologically. And the instinct for meaning helps you find a pathway through life.
Can I find furniture in a studio prop? Can I chase it on the wings of Muzak? Where do I find what's real? That's the area of truth that I really want to address, because that's where I think we have picked our own pockets and lost the reality of what has happened to us. We do not know which way to turn to anymore. You see, what has happened at the end of all of our experimentation is basically this. Philosophy has become existential, art has become sensual, education has become skeptical, religion has become mystical, our culture has become trivial, and Christianity is made minimal. They drive us into a minimalistic worldview, from the existential side of philosophy to the sensual side of the arts, to the skeptical side of education, mystical side of religion, and the trivial side of existence. We have now come to minimalistic beliefs, and we wonder what has happened to us as a society. That distinction is lost today. We have no understanding of what is true, good, and beautiful, what is evil, heinous, and destructive. We consider all choices equally valid, because we no longer know the difference between what nature is meant for nourishment and what nature is meant for garbage. I was in Iraq last year with both of my colleagues here. The last day we were taken out for lunch by a man who was a killer. He was avenging any killing done by ISIS and all that kind of stuff. And one day he was avenging the death of the killing of his brother. And he walked into the room of the man at night, and at point blank range pulled the gun, the trigger, against the temple of the man and killed him. Unknown to him, the 4-year-old son of the man was lying next to him. And this blood comes spurting out and gushing out. And the little boy sits up and he says, "Where's my father?" And he was so stunned, he looked at him and he said, "He's gone to paradise." He says, "Take me to him." He reached out and held the hand of the killer. "Take me to my father, I want to be with my dad." This fellow goes out into the night and he sits in a garbage heap, which he said, which is where I belonged with what I'd done to myself. And as he's struggling to hold back the tears coming out like a fountain, sobbing his heart out as to what he'd done to himself. But he said, "I struggled to sleep, but every time I slept, in a few minutes I would see Jesus in my dream. Again and again and again I was getting angry, till finally I surrendered and gave my life to Jesus Christ." He's working now in a ministry of a hospital which binds the wounds of the broken, including the enemy. And he drives people back and forth. He was driving us. When he told the story, I kept looking at him and I said, who was he before? Who is he now? The difference is what Christ had done in his heart and turned him from being a killer into being a healer of people, let me ask you this. Do you know anybody in your life who doesn't have that feeling? Feels there is no home for their heart. There are scores of people in our world devoid of that relationship, who are living desolate, desperate, lonely lives without meaning, without purpose. I sometimes think about the cross and shut my eyes and try to see the cruel nails, the crown of thorns, and Jesus crucified for me. But even could I see him die, I would but see a little part of that great love which like a fire is always burning in his heart. The love of God for you, for me.
ISIS claims responsibility for the murder of 4 Western tourists, including an American couple in Tajikistan.
In each place, Lauren and Jay marveled at the beauty around them, both the sights they saw and the people they met. Badness exists, sure, but even that's quite rare. By and large, humans are kind, they wrote on their blog. No greater revelation has come from our journey than this. A journey of innocence cut short.
Jay Austen and Lauren Geoghegan chronicled their adventures on their website, Simply Cycling, as they pedaled their way through Africa, Europe, and Central Asia. Austen wrote they chose to see the world by bike because life is short and the world is big, and we want to make the most out of our youth and good health before they're gone.
Biking around the world. Jay describing why.
The more you see in the world, the more you want to put that back into the world.
But it was in their 25th country, Tajikistan, where the trip turned into a nightmare. The couple had quit their jobs in Washington, D.C. last summer, chronicling their journey on social media.
They believed in the beauty and the good in the world, and so while it's heartbreaking that something so terrible was how they met their end,
The dream for the 29-year-old couple ended suddenly Sunday in Tajikistan, near the border with Afghanistan, when they and 2 European cyclists were killed by suspected terrorists who ran into them with a car, then attacked them with knives. 3 other Europeans in the group were injured. ISIS, whose membership has been growing in recent years in predominantly Muslim Tajikistan, claimed responsibility for the attack. Tajik authorities say police tracked down the 5 suspects and killed 4 of them.